What's going on YouTube? It's Dre back again with another video. Sorry about my voice. I have seemed to caught a sore throat and now I can't even talk. I'm literally trying to emphasize certain words. So if you can understand me, good for you. We're basically going to be going over economics because I want to explain how money circulates in society. I mean, down to work, labor, and the people who pay us. I feel like we need to understand that as well as understand, the money in our wallets and the money in our accounts. I think a lot of the reason why we're not prepared for things is because we're not looking into the news and seeing how markets are moving up and down, and they're deciding to do this with that, and so our taxes are moving like this, and stuff are moving in and out, and I feel like that's the large scale. That's like macroeconomics. So I feel like this is, just the overall kind of look at my economics. So I'm gonna play the video. Sorry if you don't understand what I'm saying. I'll try to put subtitles so you guys can kind of just like follow along. But here's the video.
Almost 100 years ago, one of history's greatest economists boldly predicted that by 2030 we'd only work 15 hours a week. Clearly, John Maynard Keynes was spectacularly wrong. But why? After all, his optimism was based on technology dramatically boosting productivity. In that regard, Keynes was absolutely right. Automation, computers, massive energy production, satellite communications, we've achieved innovations that were beyond his wildest imagination. By 2000, productivity in the United States had increased several times over, and never before in human history had it been easier to produce so much with such little human labour. And yet, here we are, with men working almost as many hours as we did back then, and with more women in the workforce as well. So, what is going on here? Are we secretly addicted to work, relying on it for pride, purpose and identity? Do we prefer consuming more than working less? An important part of the puzzle that Keynes missed was the propensity for the economy to invent new jobs in the service sector. And while it means we're dynamic, many of these office jobs have questionable value. A third of British workers think their job is meaningless, meanwhile silly little gadgets like mouse jigglers are flying off shelves so that we can pretend to be productive. Which raises some interesting questions. Have we already achieved the 15-hour workweek and simply failed to realise it? Has this failure contributed to a rise in meaningless work for the sake of work? And if so, could something like a 4-day workweek realistically solve this issue? It's easy to slip into a career that you aren't passionate about, don't find rewarding, or simply think is meaningless. Trust me, I've been there, it's part of the reason why I started this channel. But it wasn't easy. Starting a business is prohibitively difficult without the legal know-how, social networks, or business experience to hours a day in the midst of the Great Depression. So, if you're looking for an accessible one-stop shop for setting up and maintaining your business, head to northwestregisteredagent.com. When Keynes, in the dreary midst of the Great Depression, wrote an exciting essay predicting a future where people worked 3 hours a day and the biggest problem was how to occupy the leisure, people's imaginations ran wild, dreaming of a utopia that their great-grandchildren would enjoy. But it didn't come true. At least, not all of it. He did get some things right though. For example, he claimed that the standard of life in progressive countries 100 years hence would be between 4 and 8 times as high as it is today, and in 2011, real GDP per person in the UK was a little over 5 times higher than 1931 levels, and most other advanced economies have grown by even more. As he predicted, technological innovations and capital accumulation drove this growth. And to be fair to him, average work hours have indeed fallen in most advanced economies since 1929. So it is true that technological-driven gains in productivity have afforded us 1. Increased living standards, and 2. Less work actually required to achieve it, but the reduction in work hours has been nowhere near as dramatic as Keynes predicted. Plus, if we look closer, we can actually see a concerning pattern. Most of the reduction in working hours actually occurred ages ago. In the middle of the 20th century, from 1980 to now, annual work hours have barely budged in most of these countries, notably in the US and the UK. And this data only shows average hours per worker. It doesn't show total labour force participation. In 1948 in the USA, just 32% of working-age women worked. Now it's around 58%, so the average worker might be working slightly less hours, but a high percentage of people are working compared to the mid-20th century. And this begs the question, so theoretically, we can afford to work less, so why don't we? Well, one theory is that when we are faced with a real wage increase, we recalculate. Here, 2 counteracting forces are at play. Firstly, the wage increase makes it easier to reach the income of a targeted standard of living. This income effect may spur individuals to choose less work hours and more leisure, but the second effect works the other way. When your wage increases, the opportunity cost of leisure, that is the income sacrificed by choosing not to do work, is now higher. This substitution effect means leisure costs more, which incentivises individuals to actually increase their working hours, perhaps even offloading other domestic tasks like cooking and cleaning so they can focus on performing more paid hours. This also creates formal jobs for other people in the service industry. What seems to have happened over the last century is that this substitution effect has been bigger and the income effect smaller than what Keynes implicitly assumed. Individuals have chosen not to reduce their working hours because the income sacrifice when doing so is much larger than it used to be. In a way, this makes sense. New technologies haven't just improved productivity, they've also created new goods and services, increasing consumer demands and in turn our incentives to earn income through work. Eating at restaurants, having a car, holidaying abroad, phones, even basic central heating and washing machines. None of these things were available or common in the 1930s. The point is, although our real wages have increased, so too have our minimum standards for what we consider a decent and dignified quality of life. The quality of life that for most individuals earning minimum wage or even median salary necessitates full-time employment. In this sense, we can't afford to work less, at least on an individual level. There are, of course, other factors though. As Keynes himself recognised, humans, like all animals, are evolutionarily hardwired to work. In simpler days, if you didn't hunt, forage or build shelter, you'd literally die. Our natural insistence to preoccupy ourselves with work is baked deeply in our DNA and remains solidly in place. Long hours are also, for better or worse, seen as virtuous, whilst part-time work is often stigmatised, viewed as a lack of commitment, and humans are competitive, status-driven. How successful someone is often equates to their material riches. Ultimately, what we've seen is that as an economy, we've chosen to work more and consume more rather than work less and consume less. Technological innovation has created new consumer demands, and Keynes underestimated this. But because our productivity is now so high, there's not a lot of honest, tangible work left to actually do. What we're left with are economies where the non-essential sectors make up the bulk of GDP, and that's fine, but within a lot of these sectors, the work being done has questionable value. Like writing reports that no one will read, delivering PowerPoints that do not affect decision-making, or even entire roles purely existing because of bureaucracy that could be considered unnecessary. Sounds like these jobs are bullshit, right? That's what David Graeber thinks. Author of Bullshit Jobs, he defines one as so completely pointless that even the person who has to perform it every day cannot convince themselves that there's a good reason for them to be doing so. And yet, it exists, and is often well paid. These jobs typically proliferate in sectors like consulting, corporate bureaucracy, finance, marketing, including admin-heavy roles, where the actual output is vague or performative, and middle management roles where the business processes are fairly automated and junior employees self-sufficient. The cultural resonance of films like Office Space, The Incredibles, and shows like The Office and more recently Severance shows us that this feeling of futility and hollowness in modern office work is relatable at the very least. A UK study last year found that 53% of workers in financial services, 53% in retail, and 46% in media, marketing, advertising, and sales felt that their job was not making a meaningful contribution to the world. In the Netherlands, 40% of workers do not find their job meaningful. Now, to be fair, in other countries, the percentages are lower. It's also important to stress that just because a worker feels like their job is pointless doesn't mean that it actually is. So, although popular, Graeber's theory of bullshit jobs is vigorously contested and critiqued. An EU-based study rejects this theory altogether. A basic counter-argument is that value is subjective. If you're being paid to work in a particular role, then there's demand for that role, and therefore it has value and meaning, even if it makes you feel like an NPC or a cog in the machine. Critics provide alternative explanations for self-reported meaninglessness. They include negative workplace cultures where useful work goes unrecognised, where employees can't take initiative and become disengaged. These factors align less with Graeber's theory and more with Marx's theory of alienation. But, however you want to explain it, the fact remains. Large portions of office workers consider their job meaningless, and this is strongly associated with lower levels of well-being. Part of the problem is that for many, there's simply not enough meaningful work for them to fill their 5-day 9-to-5 work pattern with. Whether consciously or not, tasks are elongated to fill the time, and often employees simply aren't working when they're meant to be. Obviously, this doesn't apply to everybody, but if you're watching this at your desk right now, then we're looking at you, buddy. Just this year, a US survey by Resume Now found that 58% of workers regularly pretend to work, labelling it ghost working, and last year an international survey by Asana found that 65% of employees engage in what they call productivity theatre. But how can pointless tasks and time wasting exist in the private sector where market competition and profit motives are supposed to weed out inefficiencies? One answer is that these inefficiencies are hidden. In conventional economic thought, the employee's income and probability that they will be retained is a function of their marginal product of labour, that is, the additional revenue the company earns from hiring the employee. The higher an individual's marginal product is, the higher their salary and lower their chances of being fired are. But in reality, it's often extremely difficult to accurately attribute company revenues to individual employees. If a mechanic fixes 3 cars per day at an average price of $100, then it's clear to work out their marginal product of labour. But with a remote worker in a more collaborative supporting role, it's less clear. Even if we knew they responded to 6 emails, updated 3 spreadsheets, drafted 5 presentation slides and attended 5 meetings in a day, the revenue production from those activities is so indirect that it's very difficult to calculate the true value. That's why many companies use timesheets where employees record what they spend their time on each day, mapping that to revenue-generating client agreements. But this creates perverse incentives. Employees can simply exaggerate the time it took them to complete client work in order to increase their utilisation rate, typically a key performance indicator. Obviously, exaggerate too much and questions will be asked, but let's be honest, it can be pretty easy to get away with. This is nicely captured by Parkinson's law. Work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So, accurately calculating the marginal product of labour isn't usually feasible. Employers approximate and employers know this, so if they're not busy, they need to at least ensure that they look busy. The end result is that in many office environments, presence equals performance, and the theatrical display of looking busy is valued more than your actual output. If any of this resonates with you, my friend, then it's possible that you are in a bullshit job. What's sad about this is that it's a lose-lose situation of grand proportions. Employers are being deceived and aren't getting the most out of their workforce, whilst employees are incentivized to engage in productivity theatre and spend huge portions of their working life essentially doing nothing. Now, could the solution be a 4-day workweek? Between 2022 and 2024, different versions of 4-day workweek pilots took place all across the world. They mostly followed the 100-80-100 rule. That is, employees maintained 100% of their salary, worked 80% of what they previously did, and maintained 100% of their output. The largest pilot was in the UK, which included 61 companies and 2,900 workers. Overall, it worked. Revenue stayed the same, even increased in some cases, productivity increased significantly, costs were lowered since staff turnover reduced and sick leave plummeted, the well-being of employees improved and team morale increased. 92% of participating companies continued the 4-day workweek after the trial ended, and similarly positive results were found in other countries. The businesses also benefited from attracting more top talent from their respective labour markets, improving their human capital and productivity. These pilots show that Parkinson's law exists, that work does expand to fill the time available to do it. If you reduce the available time, much of the bloated, unnecessary or unfocused activity simply vanishes by necessity. Employees can no longer afford to pretend to be busy or engage in pointless tasks, because if you don't produce the same output in 4 days, then the penalty will be reverting back to the 5-day pattern again. Now, a 4-day workweek probably doesn't suit all sectors, particularly where output has stricter relationship with time, like manufacturing, or where services need to be provided 5 days or more, like healthcare, education, retail or hospitality. And where it may be possible, a one-size-fits-all Fridays off approach won't necessarily be the solution. There are also major challenges and drawbacks that haven't been fully considered. Sectors that move to a 4-day workweek would receive increased labour supply from people attracted to this better work-life balance. This risks pushing down wages in 4-day workweek jobs. It would also increase the inequality of working hours across the economy, creating a 2-tier system between blue-collar and key workers who remain working 5 days and cushy white-collar office workers who work less days without a pay cut. It's easy to see how resentment could grow amongst those who remain working 5 days, and perhaps fairly, they may demand better compensation for their relatively longer hours. Furthermore, if the newfound attractiveness of 4-day workweek sectors reduces labour supply to 5-day workweek sectors, then natural market pressure to increase 5-day workweek wages would add to the political movement for fairer compensation. Then there's the practical side of things. In many cases, employees may have too much to squeeze into just 4 days. If their previous output can't be maintained, then businesses may have to hire additional employees or pay overtime to maintain capacity. This would mean higher costs, which businesses would offset by reducing wages or increasing prices, in other words, inflation. This is still a real risk despite the early success stories, because participation in the 4-day workweek pilots was voluntary. The companies who registered to take part were the types of companies where it was most likely to succeed, so the positive results are not generalisable to all businesses in the economy. In social research, this is called self-selection bias. Nevertheless, even when taking this major limitation into account, the results do provide compelling evidence that the 4-day working week can work for some businesses. This warrants further exploration. Furthermore, it would be silly to say that we shouldn't have it at all just because it doesn't work across the board. And with other new dynamics in the labour market, like artificial intelligence improving at accelerating rates, the automation of work is set to continue, maybe even speed up, meaning in theory, we could use the productivity improvements to create more free time for ourselves as Keynes originally envisioned. Given the stagnating of working hours in the last few decades, drastic change is unlikely to happen. That said, the longer term trend seems to favour the 4-day work week. We slowly transitioned from 14-hour, 6-day weeks during the Industrial Revolution to the now standard 8-hour, 5-day weeks, despite fierce resistance at the time. The shift became the norm, and we can all agree that we're better off for it. But since the mid-20th century, there's been no groundbreaking reforms despite the productivity gains. That's why the biggest reason we might still be working so much might simply be inertia. Nudging and supporting more organisations to at least consider a 4-day working week is the only way systematic change to working hours could possibly occur. Time is a resource like any other, a finite one, and arguably the most valuable one that we have. The more of it we have to spend on what we want, then the higher our life satisfaction and fulfilment becomes. The amazing thing is that Keynes was right. Our current level of technology permits this. We're the only era in human history to have solved economic scarcity in its most fundamental form, yet we still organise our economy and work patterns like we're fighting to survive. If, as an economy, we don't at least try reducing our labour hours, then we'll never know if it won't work. Now, we recently made a video on Denmark, a country that is already well ahead of the trend on this one. They have some of the lowest working hours in the world, and yet they're some of the wealthiest people on the planet, despite not having anything like vast natural resource reserves. You should be able to click to that video on your screen now. Thanks for watching, mate.
That was a great video. It really went over the nuance of labor over the last 30 years. It's clear that there's also a pattern and a trend going on, and clearly since the Industrial Revolution, I feel like working 10 to 14 hour days, white collar, blue collar, to each his own, but it's not about how many hours you work. It's the production. So I feel like if you're working, make sure you're working for make sure that it's fulfilling to you. That's the only way that you're going to attract more wealth towards you, because you feel like you're doing something worthwhile for yourself and you're fulfilling your purpose. But this is kind of going over just like how much time we've actually created for ourselves and can create for ourselves, and that there's a lot of opportunities out there in the market. So I hope you guys stick around for more videos, because we're going to keep digging into stuff like this. Alright, to the next one. Peace.